Welcome to episode 71 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll go back and have a look at the Peel versus Port game from last week, where Peel ran out comfortable winners 18 goals 14, 122 to 8-5, 53 after Freo showed a little bit in the first quarter. And we'll have a quick look at the Peel game from last week, where they sort of sent in even a weaker side than Freo side in the WAFL finals, and then we'll have a look at the big upcoming clash now that finals are around and the home and away season is finally over. Joining us is our usual resident Victorian expert, Seppo. How are you, mate?
Good evening, Centurions, and good evening, listeners. And finals are here, and I'm excited.
Yeah, last week, Seppo, we saw Fremantle come out of the guns pretty early and really missed a couple of sitters as well, with Tabs missing one in the goal square and Ibo missing one from not much further out, showing he's probably more of a defender than a forward. But they did show a bit of signs in the first quarter, but gradually over the period of time scoreless in the second quarter, and then gradually Port got on top and they ended up being comfortable winners. But anyone really stand out for you in the game watching?
I was quite shocked with that start and how well we did, and obviously with Tabner missing those couple, we could have been even further in front and probably been a not much of a different outcome, but just really exciting to see the young guys go so well and obviously tail off. But Ross was quite happy with the first and third quarters. I think early on, quite pleased with how Taverner played, but as the game went on and just knowing how he went against his opponent, I thought Brady Gray was probably one of the highlights out of the young kids. And the other thing I was quite surprised with was how well actually Ethan Hughes actually played. I had to do a double take when I saw number 42 on the back of a player that was sort of getting a couple of touches and didn't look overawed by the occasion. And for how recently he's sort of come into footy and had not much time on the WAFL, he's actually played pretty well for his first game out there and something to work with. But I think Brady Gray just showed, we've been talking about it all year about another option as a small defender to take on the guys that always seem to tear us apart. He showed he is capable of that, went in hard. I think his decision-making and probably positioning needs a bit of help, but it's always going to be like that when you don't have the leadership out there. And I think the commentators have made a point of it when he let, I think, Robbie Gray get right out the back, or there was probably a couple of cases where, if Brady Gray was playing around, McFarlane and Johnson or Dawson, that he would have just slotted straight back into that back six quite well as a small defender. So I think that was probably one of the bigger wins out of the day.
Yeah, as you said, Hughes, you can see at times where the Ibbotson comparison comes from. Seppo just did look quite comfortable and took a couple of decent marks across half-back and probably looked a bit smoother in the number 42 than the old Robbie Hadrill, who was probably, I think, the last player we had who won there, although he always did try and punch above his weight. It was good to see Mickey Barlow playing a pretty good, strong game as a captain. And, I think, although we've persevered with him at half forward all year, I still think he looks better in the midfield, Seppo. And came forward with 35 touches. And, I suppose probably the more out of the biggest thing, I do agree with you about Brady Gray as well. I thought he did a terrific job on wingard. His disposal did let him down a little bit at times, Seppo, and you do see that in the WAFL. And if he can just work on that in the off-season, I think he has got the ability to maybe push into that 22 next year. Probably, I suppose, the bigger talking point out of it, Seppo, was probably not the performance of some of the guys who came in, but probably some of the more seasoned players or guys who had a chance this year and just didn't really fire. And Zach Clark didn't show a lot for 16 hitouts with only 4 possessions on the ground. And Crozier, who I thought might look a little bit better being up the ground, unfortunately only had 5 kicks for the day as well, and just isn't impacting on the ground when he's not got the ball in his hand, which is disappointing.
Yeah, I suppose with guys like Crozier, and I suppose when you've got like Duffy out there as well. I know Duffy got on the end of a goal, but I suppose those guys rely on a lot of the midfield supply. And I suppose we did win the, I think it was either the centre clearances. I'm not sure of the overall clearances number, but obviously Neil and Barlow did a good job of actually getting it out and beating Port without our usual dominance of Sandy and Mundy and Fife in there. But I suppose Crozier can't be in a position to get involved if he's forced to stay up the ground. And one of the other bits now, just thinking about it, is how good Blakely looked in the centre. And I think everyone's been talking, I haven't watched too many WAFL games, about his lightning quick hands, but I got to see it on the TV. And I think if he's got some other guys around him, like I was saying about Brady Gray, that Connor Blakely's just got a brilliant set of hands. That, we thought the Michael Barlow's quick handballs, the way he can get a handball out, was good. I think Blakely does it better. And he's got a great set of skills in there. So he'll be a nice addition to add to the midfield in time and get some bigger bodies around him, even get some bigger size on him himself. So it's good to see that he looks ready to go and has got a great set of hands on him, 9 handballs.
Yeah, he'll definitely need to have it too, because there was times there where just the pace of the game he looked a little not slow, Seppo, but probably just doesn't have that. I mean, and that's probably a reason why he fell to the second round. But as you said, his hands in close and working inside is certainly something to look forward to. And you'd have to think over time, whether it be next season or whatnot, that he would be the sort of replacement for the likes of De Boer, who works hard but doesn't probably have quite the skill set that Blakely does. Mm. The other interesting one you talked about was Taberner. I thought, and it's been interesting if you watch all these games, probably even over his career, Seppo, he just seems to be such a good starter in the first quarter. And whether, I don't know if it's a endurance thing or whether the ball drives up the way they use it, but he sort of tends to fall away as the game goes on a bit. But he always, in that first quarter, always seems quite strong. And I don't know whether he blows a gasket at quarter time and it's his fitness level, or you said the way our ball movement dries up a bit as sort of teams drop further back. But he always starts off really well and then just seems to fade a little bit. So hopefully he'll, give a little bit more. And we'll talk about it no doubt in the game against Sydney. But I think it's good that he's kept his place, and I think we do look better with him in the side playing up forward.
I think his fitness is probably not the issue. It might even be between the years, or obviously just a bit of a mental fatigue as the game goes on. But certainly, I know Port's defenders probably aren't the quickest out there, and probably didn't have the best guys out on the ground for them, because I think Port have been decimated a bit over the years. But he certainly showed that, that Nick Riewoldt type that we keep on comparing him to, he can run all day and even just break away. And I think he was probably unlucky with the bounce of the ball a bit, and even just trying to pick it up and soccer it forward. Gets a bit used to that and keeps up that effort, because certainly can see they can do it all day, and they keep on feeding it to him. He was sort of playing even a lone hand with no Pav or a really decent chop out with Clark and Hanneth rotating up there. It was it was a big task, but I think he did quite well, and obviously could have had a couple more goals on the scoreboard. But you can see what he does for us structure wise, and probably adds a bit of that pressuring game. Even though he doesn't look like a big tackler, he certainly moves up and down the ground well. That helps us, without the ball as well.
Yeah, and you could see even last week, Seppo, that what's his name? Ibo was really looked like he might as well have been in Perth. He didn't really put in did what he absolutely had to, but certainly wasn't going to give himself any chance of getting a risk with the finals coming up. And you can't blame him, particularly after the wretched run he's had the last couple of years with that. So there's certainly no reason why you want to risk anything at this point in time.
Speaking of risk, it was great to see that they pulled off Lachie Neale at a certain point of time, and I think he obviously copped a bit of a knock. I think Schultz probably got fined for that little knock he gave into Neale, and they obviously pulled him off and said, all right, you're gutting cotton wool. And I think even Freo Twitter put out something of a funny image of some young kid wrapped in bubble wrap and said, this is Lachie Neale on the bench. So another man management move after taking Pav off the week before and Neale out of that game. So really stripped out our midfield, and Neale still got a lot of the ball up until that point, and he got subbed out. But great to see they are taking a player-first approach and not worried about the result.
Yeah, Port was certainly giving it to him and in there and making him sort of earn every possession. So I think it was a smart move by the club in the end, taking him off. But you probably would have liked to see. I mean, they certainly did fly the flag at times. And strange thing as well, Seb, I might have missed it, but there didn't seem to be too many fines through the week after that scuffle either. But
well, I know there was one where Subin probably ran about 50 metres to get involved with a bit of a punch on, and it's amazing what effort he puts in when there's a ball there to be won or there's a fight on. He seems to move that quick, and I just made mention he could probably win the grand final sprint if you told him there's a punch on at the end of the finish line. Subin moves that quickly, and he's certainly one of the first there to fly the flag when the guys go in, and he loves a bit of a biff. But I thought, as a general game sense, he actually had a very good game and helped push that ball forward and even just get the ball out of the midfield. And you can see when they take it out of a stoppage and choose one of the lanes, the left or right hand side of the ground, and Subin gets onto the right side of it. Well, his left hand side. He's a fantastic kick of the ball and really just got the ball moving forward, which is great to see, because I think he's probably one that's probably had it almost career best form this year, or showed it in patches, and I think he deserves to keep his spot and have a good crack in the final series.
Yeah, the other interesting point probably from the weekend, Seppo, was if you looked at the time on ground in the percentages, that all the four players that you knew were going to be locked for Fremantle this in this final series, with probably Barlow, Sheridan, Ibbotson in particular, those guys probably had the lowest on ground percentage time out of all the players that we had out there. So it was interesting, I think, and obviously Lockie Neal with being the sub, but all those guys tended to be rested. Nick Subin was only 67, Barlow 72. So it was Everton was 73. So they obviously looked after those guys and ran most of the other guys as much as they possibly could. So they certainly gave them a pretty, even last week, even though they played, they certainly just about all had a quarter off when you're looking at the game time for each of them. What do you think of Tanner Smith's game? There's been a bit of talk. Obviously, he was on our list, got dropped back to the rookie list. There were some times last week where he showed a bit, and then there was other times where he sort of looked a bit out of sorts. But I mean, Schultz was a pretty good player, and with the ball entry coming in with the sort of pressure at times, I thought he battled pretty hard.
Yeah, I suppose he had to battle pretty hard because the ball was coming in quite a bit. I think it was a couple of passages of play where I sort of questioned his decision making and his kicking skills, but generally as a defender, I think he did okay and didn't drop his head down too much and just kept on going. I think Alex Pearce looked probably a bit more lost than what Tanner Smith did, and even though Alex Pearce has shown for the full year that he's probably had the better run, but I think he was Pearce was probably carrying a bit of an injury. But yeah, I think Tanner Smith showed, he's okay and he's not the worst out there. So he's got some sort of sets of skills to work with and done okay, matched up to the bigger bodies of Port's forwards.
Yeah, Pearce. It was interesting that Pearce and Smith were the only two guys that actually played 100% game time as well. So, but I sort of put it out on Twitter this week, Seppo. I think maybe on the forums as well. But as you said, probably with the exception of Tabs, no one else really stood up and said, was screaming out, pick me out of the guys who were sort of on the fringe from those guys. And I think that's been reflected a bit probably in the game changes this week. And, I think Tabs was the one who did stand up. And, the reality is that if Griffin, I think, didn't have his hamstring injury, he probably would have come in as well, because Clark sort of, and I've been, as you know, Seppo, quite a strong defender of him, but he certainly didn't do himself probably any favours last week with the performance he put on. It was disappointing, to say the least.
And he's come off that concussion or big knock on the WAFL a couple of weeks ago as well, so he hasn't been stringing some fantastic games together, but we know he's got history at the start of the year and had patches where he played really well, so let's just hope he gets back to his best.
Yeah, and as you said, you never know what concussion will do with those type of things, but probably enough on that game, Seppo, and probably even less on the in Peel with their first final this week, and with all the number of players coming up, and I think there was 7 or 8 debutants for Peel who ended up being flogged comprehensively, 22 goals, 13, 145 to 5-6, 36, and probably in a strange irony, Seppo, that Peel ended up being very similar to Fremantle in the fact that they started off the first quarter very well and led by two goals at quarter time, but then the wheels fell off after that, and in the end, West Perth ran out very comfortable winners. But Peel, I'm sure, will be happy to get a lot of those players from Port back this week and be a little bit more competitive against West Perth.
Yeah, I think it's shocking to rip that many players away, and I think I had to scan through the list and probably find about 3 or 4 Freo listed players, and I suppose the expectations are high now for guys like Sean Hurley. When you see him get a couple of touches and a goal, you think he's doing pretty well now. So you expect him to lift it a bit more and get it right up there.
Yeah, one other pleasing point is Seppo, for those who are a bit of the WAFL watchers, I don't think Chris Coonan from West Perth exactly the toughest ruckman going around, but he has got a tall player and he's got a reasonable leap, and it was good to see Craig Moller beat him comprehensively in the hitouts, 45-20 in the hitouts. So Moller once again showing a little bit more development, taking a few marks around the ground. Didn't kick any goals, but playing in the ruck most of the day showed that he can play that first ruck if needed.
He's going to be good in the future, and hopefully makes a spot, because there's going to be a call on the rookie list for him, being on there a couple of years, and time to make a move.
Yeah. All right, Seppo. Now on to the more important issues. And this week, Fremantle have, after requesting the Saturday game, got the Saturday afternoon game at 1:20, and the conditions could be it was a bit rainy here today, and by all accounts it could be raining during the game on the weekend as well.
Even
Uh,
possible hail I've read that could come down pretty hard in the
yeah,
afternoon.
be interesting to see how it all ends up, and I'll be out in the outer there, so no doubt needing the wet weather gear. But we'll just sit back for a little bit, Seppo, and let you do the ins and outs for us this week.
Yes, we've got coming out of the side first, just a couple of missions, not too many injuries out of the whole bunch, but I suppose the two injuries first was Crozier and Hughes out with a calf each. But then you've got Alex Pearce, Tanner Smith, Tendai Mzungu, Clancy Pearce, Connor Blakely, Max Duffy, Paul Duffield, Brady Gray, Ed Langdon, Jacob Ballard, Jack Hanneth, and Lockie Weller all being omitted. Obviously, a couple of the other guys kept their spot on the side, and we made 14 other changes, bringing in the talents of Lee Spur, McFarlane, Dawson, Hill, Johnson, Sutcliffe, Fife, Pavlich, Daniel Pearce, Main, Walters, Sandlands, Mundy, and Ballantyne, with the emergencies being Alex Pearce for obviously a tall option, Clancy Pearce for some grunt, and Mzungu for some run. So going over to Sydney, obviously Franklin's out with the mental illness and obviously the seizure episodes he had the other day. Kieran Jack's out, unfortunately, with that knee injury copped up in the previous game, and they bring back in Jared McVeigh and Ben McGlynn, who's a type that always seems to cause havoc against us. So it's it's interesting for them, and their emergencies are Xavier Richards, James Rose, and Jax Cox.
And I bet you, Seppo, that if you asked probably 80, 90% of any AFL supporters to sort of match the names to the face, that majority of them wouldn't have a clue who any of those three are, probably
Yeah.
myself included. So, but just on a serious note, Seppo, let's hope that, I mean, you never want to see anyone out with any type of injury or even mental illness. So, hopefully Buddy does sort of get back to his best, and you never just want to see anyone like that. And knowing a few people in my time who've gone through it, it's never a nice thing, regardless of what it is. And let's hope that he does manage to get back to his best sooner rather than later.
Yeah, certainly.
Uh, Also, a couple of milestones this week, Seppo. A bit of a change that we're having the milestone game as opposed to having it against us.
Yeah, it's always the wrath of the milestones or retirements against us, but this time hopefully we deal out the pain with both Stephen Hill and Garrick Ibbotson both bringing up their 150th game, which is fantastic for those two. And I think we've got even someone else potentially playing. I don't know if been selected, but potentially next week or the week after some milestones as well. So fantastic for those two. I think come out of the same draft or a year apart, Hill and Ibbotson, but bringing up 150 games is a pretty big milestone because you're well into your career and you're playing your peak footy around that age. So great to see that both Hill and Ibbotson are playing their 150th this weekend. And one thing we haven't covered is something we were just discussing before the podcast, but our umpires are looking quite favourable with our home ground advantage as well. We've got D-Mark Getz, Razor Ray Chamberlain and Robert Finlay out there with Jordan Bannister as the emergency umpire. So no problems with them, and thank God we don't have the umpires that are out on Friday night for the Eagles-Hawks game with Dalglish, Stevic, Meredith and Luke Farmer as their emergencies. So I think we got the good deal with the umpires here.
Yeah, well, and hopefully they don't have any impact in the game one way or the other. I mean, that's all you're really asking for. A couple of other little things through the week, Seppo, which probably we'll just touch on briefly before going into maybe the matchups, was Fife got picked in the Coaches Award after missing 4 or 5 games, as he did last year, and he's the overall winner playing in this game with Dan Hanbury getting him over in the very end by 1 vote. And once again, Seppo, we did talk a little bit last week about potential All-Australians, and I think we just about picked all of them, but as we talked last week, the selectors seem to have a bit of a love fest with, particularly with Nick Nat and the ruck, and I was staggered to see that Sandy didn't at least make the 40.
I really did think that Sandy would make the squad of 40, or even if they were going to pick a squad, pick 3 ruckmen to drop out down to 1 or 2 on the day. But the fact that Natanui got picked ahead of Sandlands, I'm still scratching my head now. I think I got over it, maybe 2 days after they announced it, but still to this day, I've gone back and looked over a couple of stats, and I don't know if they're picking Goldstein as the lone ruckman to say that he was better than Sandy, and they're throwing Natanui in there for something different. But clearly, when you look at Sandland's stats and even just head-to-head against those other two during the year, you have to have your sort of head screwed off to not realise that he is a very dominant ruckman. But obviously they can choose the All-Australian for however they like, and they'll have their reasons. But we all know what Sandland's capable of, and let's just hope he has a cracker of a final series, because just to prove those guys wrong that like to think they know how to call a good side.
I think he'll probably end up, to be honest, particularly because some of the guys on there like Healy and those sort of guys absolutely love him, Seppo. As long as he plays 20 games a year, he'll get picked every single year in the squad. He's just got, he's probably a little bit like that Chris Judd like at the time. And not saying that Judd didn't deserve it all those times he got called up, but some players have automatic, and probably Fife will be in that category as well. Like probably a bit like Gary Ablett to a degree as well. They'll provided they play enough games every year, they'll just about be an automatic selection. So going on to the matchups this week, Seppo, obviously there's going to be a number of key crucial matchups in this game. With Buddy Franklin out, Sam Reid, who sort of showed a little bit last in that first game, Fremantle obviously getting out to a very good first half before Sydney clawed it back to, I think, within 3 points before Fremantle kicked away. But Sam Reid was sort of showing quite a bit up around the ground, but he'll be playing a lot closer to goal, you'd think, with the likes of Tippett and Sam Reid playing there. So, I mean, they've still got two reasonably good key forwards, and McFarlane used to always get the job on Buddy, so it'll be interesting to see which way they line up down and back with. You'd have to think maybe Dawson will take Tippett to start with, and then they'll leave McFarlane on Sam Reid, which allows Johnson to play that loose man as much as possible, which is what Ross Lyon and Fremantle love to see.
Well, I think the interesting thing is when you look at the matchups, I think we can cover them for height with who we've got out there. It's their smalls that worry me. When you've got guys like Gary Rowan, Isaac Heaney, and probably Ben McGlynn, they're three names that probably when we look at guys like Sutcliffe and Spur, it'd be nice to have Brady Gray out there as well. But unfortunately, you can't just drop him in on it. But there's probably more scoring power, I feel, in the Swans smalls with Buddy not out there than what they do. And they're obviously massive out with Parker not being out there, because I rate is probably one of Swan's best players overall, and obviously Jack out as well is a massive loss for them in their midfield. But they've still got a forward scoring power that's capable of kicking a couple, and even though that Johnson and McFarlane and Dawson and Ibbotson floating in at their best could probably count for the talls. It's their smalls that always seems to worry me every single week, no matter who we're playing.
Yeah, I think probably this sort of game, Seppo in particular, if you look at the midfield, if you think if Fremantle get enough of the ball, the Swans back six are the ones that probably look a little bit weakened. They've got Nick Smith out, who I really rate as a really top player, as an All-Australian, but they just, like, Richards is getting on, Grundy struggle a bit. Laidler, has his moments, but he's sort of, not a plotter at best, but he's got limitations. Zach Jones is reasonably new. Reece Shaw, him and Ballantyne will be sort of going head to head, and there's no doubt that Reece Shaw will get. Or was it Heath Shaw that used to always sort of get in each other's sort of grill? But and Rampy will probably have the job on one of them, or either probably Walters. But I think it's how well the Sydney defence holds up against if Fremantle get enough of that ball inside 50. As opposed to the other way. I think, as you said, there will be, particularly if it is wet, I think those colder, those small players could come into effect. I think Spur will definitely be able to take control of one of them. Seppo, I think you'll probably find Heaney will probably play on Sutcliffe. And then I reckon they'll probably put Spur, depending on which way they want to go, I think if McGlynn plays on him, he's got that body strength to play on him. But it'll be, if he doesn't, I don't think Spur will probably have the leg speed to go on Rowan. So it'd be interesting to see which way they do play them, whether probably Spur might be a matchup for McVeigh, although McVeigh does play a fair bit off half-back as well. What do you think of the, obviously in the ruck contest, we've got Clark and Sandlands versus Pike and Dean Towers.
Oh, it's interesting when you go back to the side we faced, Swans at home back in round 4. You look across, and we probably were playing our best footy back then. There's only a couple of differences to our side, and we were operating with Sandilands Clark combo then. They think they had Pike and potentially one other. Can't remember if they went with Tippett or someone else as their second option of a ruckman or Reid in there. So they're going with something different, and I think if it's wet, you'd still think we're going to go in with both Sandilands and Clark, and obviously we were discussing before on Clark's form last week, but you just wonder with the weather if there's any doubt that Taberner unfortunately might be the one to make way for extra run. And I know Ross has talked about it in the past at press conferences, making the call at last minute, but you never know that. We still need two ruckmen, obviously, with Sandilands can't do it all on his own. So it will be a great matchup to see Sandilands and Clark combine again, because certainly on in the year they were very good at winning the hitouts. And last time we played, we actually won the hitouts 44-26. So hopefully the wet weather doesn't affect too much, and we can use those two guys to ensure our midfield with Fife and Mundy and Hill and Barlow at the drop of the ball just dominate.
Yeah, I mean, it was only probably 5 or 6 weeks ago that Sydney did come over and play at the main stadium, and West Coast took care of them pretty comfortably by 8 or 9 goals. And even on that day, Seppo, I think Parker was probably one of their best with 27 touches and that sort of thing. So it is going to be definitely a tough ask for them this week. And if we go through the last one, Seppo, that we had in terms of for us from that round 4 game, the ins for us were Dawson, Valentine, and Sheridan, and the outs from that game, Duffield, Mzungu, and Clancy. So you'd have to think that probably on paper we look a little bit stronger with those 3 coming in than the 3 going out. And yet for Sydney, the ins are Goods, Zach Jones, Dean Towers, Tommy Mitchell, and Brandon Jack. And the outs are Nick Smith, Kieran Jack, Luke Parker, Craig Bird, and Buddy. So there's a pretty, that's a pretty sort of big gap of talent that's coming in and out for that Sydney side, even compared to the one that we played in round 4.
Mm.
And the likes of, even as you talked about, Parker, but even the fact that Craig Bird and those sort of guys who have been, not underrated players, but certainly very good players for them this year, and he's certainly going to be missed as well. But they're certainly going to need the likes of Hanbury and Kennedy and Tommy Mitchell to have massive games if they're going to be any chance to match it with Freo. And I think their 3 starting midfielders that we just talked about there, Seppo, will probably be able to match it maybe with the likes of our midfield. But I think when that second string goes in there, or when they rotate in and out, I think it's going to be a lot. They're going to have to really step up to maintain it with Fremantle, particularly if they use the likes of Barlow and that in there a little bit more as well.
Mm. Do you reckon that if you're talking about pressure and depth and everyone that we're going to be playing through there, I know it's going to be wet and it's going to be a pressure game, no doubt, but do you think the Freo are going to trot out their pressure game plan that they implied back in 2013 in the prelim against Sydney, that will just come out and absolutely blitz them? I think after the rest, the guys are going to have a lot of their tank, and they've talked about that blitz for 20 minutes or 15 minutes at a time, where we're absolutely pressure and kill and hurt the guys with the footy. That if the second they pick it up, you've got Ballantyne that's been training for weeks, that's going to want to put pressure on. You've got De Boer, playing a role that's it's going to be looking to hold his spot on that side, and guys like Subin that'll be going right out there. We've got a lot of guys that are going to be hungry, hunting for the ball. So I think if the guys like Kennedy and Hanbury and Tom Mitchell, or even guys like Jeddah or Cunningham on the outside, are going to get hold of the ball, they're going to be chased down pretty quick, and we're going to be up in their faces. It'd be great to see how hard we come out early, and just put the physical pressure on and play our game style of pressure once again.
Yeah, I mean, there's every time you watch Fox footy in a Sunday, or particularly on a Sunday afternoon Freo game, so they always talk about the Freo starts, and I can't remember, these are the blitz or whatever they use it, and coming out, and you have to think, well, we've been waiting how many weeks, Seppo? Every week we sort of come on and say, well, this will be the week Freo turn it on, and this will be the week that we'll start to see some of that form that we saw early in the year. But
they do it for a quarter, but then they stop.
Well, it is, and it's interesting to see why that happens. Is it we just seem to be showing. I don't know whether it's it's like we can remember how to do it, and then we just sort of think, well, we'll just keep just doing enough. And it'll be interesting to see if they do run it for 4 quarters, or whether they can sustain it for 4 quarters. And I think, to be perfectly honest, Seppo, I think this is probably as good a side. Maybe not everyone's at 100% fitness, but this is as good a side as we can name on paper. I don't think there's anyone, for me, who's out of the side. Whether you could argue Clancy and De Boer could be interchanged, but other than that, Seppo, I can't really see anyone else who could, who I would take out of the side and put someone in. I know there'll be some talk about maybe Taberner and Pearce, but I think Taberner has shown a little bit more as a key forward and has played finals. Although he didn't set the world on fire, even if he can just bring the ball to ground, he does give us a contest down there. But I think this is as strong as we can possibly get, Seppo.
Oh, definitely. And I think not only is it strong, but we've got to rest into all those players. And obviously, Sydney haven't done what sides like North and what we have, and give the guys a good rest. But I know they can only play who's in front of them, but they probably had a soft, probably last 3 or 4 games. So they probably haven't been tested too much. But you probably can say the same for the last guys getting that week off. But I think it's great for guys like Walters and Dawson and Fife and Ballantyne that we haven't sort of rushed them and given them every chance to have time off. But you think that extra little bit of rest, and who cares if Fife didn't win the AFL Coaches Association Award against Hanbury? He comes up against him, and hopefully it means that he's going to come out motivated. But you got to watch that Fife doesn't come out too motivated, because he's still sitting on that 2 fines for the year, and it doesn't mean anything for Brownlow now through final series, but he's on a fine line, and let's just hope that all our guys, because there's probably a couple of guys sitting on some, I don't know if they still have those carryover points and fines and whatever it means now, but it's going to be interesting how tough when they're going in, how easily they look at the decisions.
Yeah, the carryover points I don't think carried over, but I think it will be exasperated if you do have a bad record, as we saw earlier in the year. But let's hope we don't even have to worry about any of that, and probably. Who do you think the matchups will be in the midfield? Who do you think Kennedy? Do you think Kennedy and maybe Fife, or Kennedy and Mundy will go head to head, or who do you think Hanbury will go to?
I'd like to see Hanbury versus Fife, just to sort of battle it out for the true winner of the not retribution for that Coaches Association Award, because we can clearly see if games played that Fife was far superior. But obviously the type of player that Hanbury is, I think Kennedy's more similar to Mundy, and they can probably just run around at the feet of the 2 ruckmen, just accumulating. I think more of an outside player, Hanbury would be a great matchup on Fife to run around him. Not sure Tom Mitchell's probably capable of going with Fife, but it would be interesting to see if they do try and put some other people on Fife. But you think Hanbury might be the most likely matchup?
Yeah, do you reckon Mitchell and Neil might go head to head? They're both ball magnets. They both like chasing their own ball. Very similar types. Maybe they'll look at matchup, and then you've obviously got Mundy versus Kennedy, who once again are both good accumulators, both hard at it, and Josh Kennedy in particular with a contested ball is a bit of a beast in there, and if it is a wet game, he's more than capable of racking up 20 plus contested possessions in there. So, as you said, I think it's those 3 in there, Seppo, that will be the key to any chance Sydney has. But when you start taking those guys out there, or they've got to be rotated out of the midfield, it's then you're looking at the likes of Jetta, Cunningham, and then you've got the likes of Jake Lloyd, Brandon Jack. It just drops off quite a bit after that, and I'm just, whether they use McVeigh in there a little bit more, but you just have to think and at Freo will be just that little bit deeper with the way they can rotate, particularly because the likes of Walters and that have played in there a little bit as well this year.
I suppose it's nice to see that Fremantle have dug out a bit of stats on David Mundy to say that he's averaging 27 disposals this season, and averages over the past 4 finals 27 disposals. So he's a big accumulator. You just have to look back to his grand final performance, from a couple of years ago for what he can do in a game, and how he can turn it, and how he's actually stepped up without Fife. So let's just say if he's performing at that same level, and you bring back Fife into it, that we'll have the tools to deal with the Sydney midfield, and let's just hope that Sandy can get first use and get a couple of hit-outs to advantage.
Yeah, and do you think it's going to be a lock for the subs vest this week, Seppo, with De Boer getting the bib, or
potentially? You just wonder if they obviously we always look at who's last on the interchange, and they've got Ballantyne there, so you think maybe they want the sting taken out of the game, because they know it's going to be a big one, and let him loose to run out the game, and bring on a small for a tall if Taberner's going to be out there and wet, and they sub him out. So you never know.
I'll be shocked, Seppo. I think Ballantyne is such a barometer, and I think he's probably a little bit like Farmer used to be for us in the ground. If Ballantyne comes on early, gets a big tackle or kicks a goal early, he just excites the crowd. It would just he would just give a huge momentum boost. So I would be absolutely stunned if Ballantyne doesn't start. And I think if he does run out of puff, because obviously he hasn't got the match fitness in terms of playing games, you can maybe bring De Boer in that way, which would probably suit De Boer maybe a little bit more, because he can then come in and sort of crash into the middle a little bit. I mean, he's not an ideal sub, but in that regard, he's not going to come on and give you that bit of burst of speed or anything like that. But he will certainly give you grunt in the contest, and probably for him, he ends up coming a little bit too strong in the contest and gives away some needless high tackles and things like that. But I'd be absolutely shocked if Ballantyne didn't start.
It's one thing we've probably seen from De Boer, and it's different use for the sub because traditionally you see a lot of clubs use the sub as an impact player that comes on and is quick off the mark and might not have really good endurance and sort of can run a bit once the game starts to open up. But you look at the stats when someone like De Boer or Duffield or Subban's actually come on, and it's just been tackling manic pressure. So it's obviously once the bodies are sore from everyone out there, you throw someone like De Boer in, you give him a job to go hunt the ball and not necessarily run on the outside of the packs, because De Boer can run all day and he's a good runner. He's not quick, but he's more of a runner as the game goes out. I think they're probably using him to say, all right, as the bodies get tired, and they're talking about limiting interchanges next year, what someone like that might do. So it's probably a different type of a use of the sub, but it might seem to work, because I think the last few times that De Boer has been the sub, he's actually not shown it in possessions, but certainly tackles in the 1% is what he does when he does come on, even if it's just for a quarter.
Yeah, what do you think will happen if, and I know you touched on it briefly earlier, Seppo, when we talked about the rain and the fact that Tabs will probably be the one that misses out. What way do you think? Do you think that Fremantle will drop Tabs if it rains, or do you think they may drop Clark and then use Tabs in a pinch hitting ruck in the roll, or like pinch hitting role in the ruck, or and who do you think will be the inclusion if that does happen? You couldn't imagine Pearce will come in if it's raining, so it'd have to come down to the Pearce or Mzungu. What way do you reckon they'll lean if it
probably rain? If it's someone like Clark or Taberner coming out, obviously interchangeable. If you're saying that we're going to give Sandlands a chop out with Taberner helping out, and I haven't seen him in there too much, taking a ruck battle, but if Clark does come out and you could say on form last week, you could probably warrant it. But if it is one of those two, you'd think someone like Mzungu that's capable of going forward, because you think with having Spur, McFarlane, Dawson, Johnson, Sutcliffe, Ibbotson, you probably don't need to throw someone like Clancy Pearce behind the ball when you've also got someone like Tommy Sheridan and Stephen Hill that's playing a bit behind the ball as well. So Mzungu probably would be nice. But obviously it probably requires a bit more of a structure change to get someone like Clancy in there.
Yeah, and let's just hope the rain does stay away. I mean, we've played plenty of wet weather footy this year, Seppo, and although we certainly haven't turned it on in the rain, we've only really lost the one game, and that was against Richmond, and even in that game we sort of just fell asleep in the first quarter and then sort of came back into it. So it's not like the wet weather is going to sort of hamper us that much, and I don't think Sydney have been that great in the wet this year either. By all accounts, so it'll certainly be interesting to see that one. Any other sort of matchups stand out for you in this one?
Not really. It's all pretty covered. I think the usual Pav and Main will have to stretch out Grundy and Richards, key backmen, and I think Walters and Ballas can obviously cause a bit of. You touched on it before. Without Smith out there, he's probably a really good defender, and I know Sydney probably are missing someone like Alex Johnson that's been out for a couple of years now, but certainly we can expose their defenders, because the other guys aren't as good without those guys there. So hopefully Walters can continue his great run of form before he had that little rest. So bagging goals of the year, and it's great to see that little piece that Ross Lyon did on Michael Walters, and his little story of where he is right now. And it's great to hear. You could say he could probably captain the club one day. It shows how highly rated he is internally. So hopefully he can bring that to the game and bag a couple, because we are looking for that 2 goals a game extra. And if it's not coming from someone like Taberner or Clark, it's guys like Walters and Ballas together with Pav and Main that can all get to our magical 12 goals, 13 goals, whatever would be nice.
Yeah, it always seems interesting, Seppo, that every time we've talked about, or you hear in the media about that extra magical 2 goals, that there's nothing sure that it's going to rain in the game on the weekend. It's just about a guaranteed rain cry. So any farmers out there who are looking to get some rain on their paddocks, and just talk about the getting to the magical 15 goals, and then all of a sudden it'll start raining, and hopefully we'll see what happens in that regard. The other, do you think Laidler will get the job on Main? He would seem a more logical matchup than, and then maybe Richards would take the resting ruck down there. Would that be Sandy or Clark?
Yeah, definitely. It's probably enough of Laidler even though he isn't really tall, he seems to have tall jobs. So kind of like our Ibbotson. So it's probably a good job for him. But yeah, you think Pavlich usually gets double teamed by someone. So let's hopefully, if there's Clark or Taberner there, that they can draw away one of those taller types away from Pav and let him get some space and kick a couple.
Yeah. The other interesting one, Seppo, if you look at the Sydney midfield there, they don't really have a natural matchup in terms. They're quite a small midfield in terms. They're very nuggety, but they're not a lot. There's not a lot of height there compared to our guys. It'll be interesting to see, particularly if Lyon decides to try and stretch some of those guys down back, and like whether the likes of Fife will rotate through, because even the likes of Hanbury, he's only, I think, he's just below 6 foot. So there's not a lot of them who are really massive players in there. And I think Josh P. Kennedy I think he's 188, so he's probably the tallest, but he doesn't have in there have a massive leap like Fife does or anything like that. He's probably more that Mundy type where he sort of moves across the ground. So it'll be interesting to see how Fremantle will try and exploit those sort of that height in the forward line as well if they need to.
Yeah, definitely. It's one area, and if obviously trying to play it to the ground when it's wet, there'll be guys like Jetta and Cunningham trying to run around with probably Daniel Pearce and Sheridan on their heels. So it'll be a nice matchup on the outside if the ball does get out there as well.
Yeah. All right, Seppo, I think any other points you want to bring up before we get to the all-important tips for the game?
No, I think it's wraps it up, and it's just great to see all that inclusions come back in and a nice strong side. And let's just hope that rest means they come out with a blitz and they're not asleep and still thinking it's a week off. So let's hope that all this planning and everything we've done, and like Ross says, this is the real season starts now. So let's just hope that after all this massive build-up of 23 weeks, they can put into place what we've done this year.
Yeah, we've got a couple of guys going in under, I suppose, a small cloud, Seppo. I know, like Ballantyne hasn't played an official game, and you've also got Sutcliffe who did his shoulder in the last quarter against Melbourne, had the week off, and by all accounts has played all right. I don't think Luke trained at all this week, so and that might be just careful management for him. So touch wood, there is no issues in that sort of regard, but it'll certainly be interesting to see. Who do you think will get the? Do you think they'll go with Johnson on Goods, or who do you think will get Goods down there for them?
Rotation of anyone. I think Ibbotson's probably even manned up on Goods before in the past, so that is an option. So
yeah, and that would seem a pretty logical matchup. They both play pretty well, and then maybe Johnson or Ibbotson, depending on who they want to have as that guy, that loose player cutting off the leads inside. So, all right, Seppo, what's your tip for this week?
I'm going, I think, with the wet and the fact that Freo, if they do get out to a biggish lead, that they'll want to conserve energy, even if it's a week off. But if we do the job, get it done, no risk policy, we'll get usually it's over about 5 goals, 35 points seems to be the margin that we park the bus or stop the blitz. So I'm going to leave it at 36 points.
Yeah, I don't think they will this week, Seppo. I think it's for two reasons. One, that Sydney showed in that round 4 clash that I think they were up 8 or 9 goals in that game, and they got it back to 3 points. So, and the fact of the matter is that even if they do play really hard this week, they will get that week off. So I don't think they're going to sort of give any. If they do manage to get out to the sort of lead you're talking about, I don't think they're going to try and give Sydney any chance of getting back into the game at all. And well, that's what we'd hope for anyway. So, but I think Sydney Fremantle will do the job this week, and I think they'll get up by around that 27-point mark. I think it'll sort of Fremantle will get out to a pretty solid lead, and then I think there'll be a fair bit of back and forth between that. But I can't see but it all depends on those weather conditions as well, Seppo. Do you think the dry or the wet suits us better?
At this stage with the rest, I reckon the dry would have suited us, but I think the wet probably suits Sydney in terms of the matchup. So if we had that height advantage you're talking to midfield, I think that drive would have suited us to exploit more. And obviously the rest as well probably would have over the course of the game, a dry game might help. So, but I suppose either, we've had that experience in the wet this year, but either way, you'll probably see both over the 4 quarters of the game. A bit of hail.
Probably the wet may negate some of their leg speed though, Seppo. They are quite quick with the likes of Rowan, Lewis Jetta. Even McGlynn has pretty good wheels when he wants to. So Mitchell. So it may hurt them in that regard, but at the end of the day, you just want to get the win and then move on and hopefully get the week off and then worry about the prelim after that.
Yep.
All right. Any other points you want to bring up, Seppo, before we finish up for this one?
No, other than the fact that I hope everyone over there enjoys it, has a good game, obviously has good seats in the weather, no matter where you picked them. Did you get your usual seats Centurions behind the bench?
I'm just a little bit further around, so I'm in 106 this week, but I was pretty happy with that in the end. So if it's pouring down rain, it may not be terrific, but after 20 years being in that same spot, it's more comfortable sitting there than anywhere else. So I can't complain too much in the end.
Yeah, I'll be down at the Great Northern Pub watching. Got a whole bunch of mates over here in Melbourne, so looking forward to it. Let's just hope we get that win and get the coveted week off and watch the rest of the other teams beat up on each other.
Well, that's exactly what you want to see, isn't it? And hopefully, you don't want to see any injuries, but you do want to see them belt the suitcases out of each other, particularly if you're playing them the week after as well. So, but definitely some interesting games on this week. All right, thanks for joining us, Seppo. Seppo, before we go, what are your tips for the other 3 games in the finals?
Well, I think Hawks may just get over the West Coast. I know they're probably a couple of injuries guys like on Smith and the others, and I think Eagles probably haven't made a risk with some people, but I think the Hawks might just get up, and I'd just love to see them. I know it's going to push Eagles on our side of the draw, but I think Hawks can get up by a small margin. I think the Adelaide would probably be just a bit too good for the Bulldogs with a couple of changes they've had to make, and Adelaide are in a good stretch of form and probably have a better midfield. And I think Richmond, even though I'd love to see them lose, 3rd final in a row after 3 attempts, I think Richmond will get over North.
Yeah, it'll be. Yeah, that Richmond North one's always a bit of a hard one to see, but you'd have to favour Richmond, you'd think. And I think Richmond, whoever plays the week after Seppo, I think that Richmond would certainly give them a much better game than probably what North Melbourne will if they have to play a couple of weeks in a row. Because we'll get the other week, depending on how the side of the draw goes, we would have the Adelaide Western Bulldogs would come to our side of the draw. And if it was played at Etihad, I definitely would have picked the Bulldogs, but I'm not so confident with them at the G. So, as you said, I think it's probably, although they've had a bit of a fairy tale game, I think in the end, I think Adelaide might be a bit strong there at the MCG. Although, it'd be good to see the Western Bulldogs. I think they'd be clear 3 or 4 goal winners if it was at Etihad, and they'd definitely be dirty that they're not having a home final there. That's for sure. Yeah. Especially when they played, when they have Geelong and Freo played down at Simmons Stadium, which had an even smaller capacity. So, and that game on Friday night, it's a sort of it's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't when you're looking at the draw, isn't it, Seppo? With you don't really want the Hawks to have 2 games, and but then you don't potentially play them, and then having a derby final could be, having a derby prelim could just be a bit of a bloodbath. So, may not necessarily be a great result for either side either in that regard. So, it'll certainly be a tough game for either of them, that's for sure, tomorrow. All right, thanks for joining us, Seppo, and hopefully we'll be able to just have the sort of review next week and don't have to worry about the preview for another week.
That'll be fantastic, and go Freo.
Yep, thanks for joining us again this week, Seppo, and we'll catch you again next week. And to all the listeners, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next week. Go Freo, and if you're going to the game, hope you've got your voice is nice and loud and the Freo chant rings true. So let's enjoy it and let's hopefully get the win. Bye for now.